The committee will come to order. Welcome to the markup of the Child and Family Services Improvement and Innovation Act today. In 1996, I was part of the historic reform of our welfare system, as were some of the members on the dais. So I've seen what Congress can do when we work together across party lines to accomplish goals for the greater good. And the child welfare legislation before us today is no different. And I'd like to thank Human Resources Subcommittee Chairman Davis and Ranking Member Doggett for their leadership on this issue. They've held numerous hearings on these issues, and this markup is a product of their hard work over many months. I'd also like to thank Senate Finance Chairman Baucus and Ranking Member Hatch for their work on this in the Senate. The legislation has two main components: reauthorizing and improving expiring child welfare programs and extending child welfare waiver authority. The waiver authority, administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, would allow states to use federal foster care money to test innovative child welfare programs. This waiver program allows states to figure out which child welfare programs work best and which are examples of success that can and should be repeated. Among the many technical but important policies included in this legislation is a provision I'm very interested in involving the accuracy of data about child deaths due to maltreatment. One of the failings of our current system is we don't even have a complete count of the number of children who die each year due to maltreatment. Literally hundreds of child deaths are missed each year in official statistics. I asked GAO to review this and provide recommendations for improving the accuracy of this important data. The legislation before us will help close gaps in our knowledge by directing states to describe how they currently report child deaths due to maltreatment, as well as explain how they will fill in any gaps. Unless we have a complete picture of how many children die due to maltreatment, we'll never be able to design fully effective systems to prevent that horrific outcome. This bill helps us make important progress toward that goal. And also, given the current condition of the economy and the need to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars, it should be noted that this legislation does not add one dime to the deficit and is fully paid for. Like I said before, this bipartisan and bicameral legislation is an example of what can happen when we come together to solve problems for our nation. I now yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Davis for the purpose of an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Child and Family Services Improvement and Innovation Act continues this committee's tradition of bipartisanship in crafting child welfare legislation. The bill we're considering today reauthorizes two important child welfare programs incorporating a series of improvements developed during hearings held by the Subcommittee on Human Resources over the past few months. This bill is the result of collaboration between House Republicans and House Democrats, as well as our colleagues from both parties in the Senate. In addition to continuing and making improvements to two major child welfare programs, this bill also renews authority for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to approve child welfare waivers during the next 3 years. Past waivers have allowed states to test new and better ways of helping children at risk of abuse and neglect. Earlier this year, the House passed legislation renewing this authority, but the Senate has not followed suit. This bill, which our colleagues in the Senate also support, will allow innovation to continue and may yield information for us to use in improving child welfare programs in the future. This bill also will establish a process to create much-needed data standards in child welfare programs. This language is a first step towards improving collaboration between social service programs. We've often heard in subcommittee hearings that states and programs within states have difficulty coordinating services because of difficulty in sharing data, and that this lack of coordination increases cost and decreases effectiveness. This bill directs the Secretary of HHS to work with states to establish national data standards so that all state child welfare systems are speaking the same language. I thank the ranking member on the Human Resources Subcommittee, Mr. Doggett of Texas, for working with me on this legislation and for his efforts to improve how we serve children and families across the country. Finally, I want to note that this legislation, as you spoke, Mr. Chairman, does not add to the deficit. I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation, and thank you for scheduling today's markup of it, and yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Davis. Before I yield to the ranking member for any statement he wishes to make, I ask that all member opening statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Levin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is important legislation. Clearly, we all agree there's nothing more vital than the welfare of children. This committee has been working on legislation of this nature for many, many, many years. We have struggled to improve the programs to make them more effective and more accountable. And so we have here today a bill that is bipartisan and bicameral, as has been said, and I think we all join in congratulating Mr. Davis and Mr. Doggett for their leadership. And with that spirit, I would like to yield the balance of my time to the ranking member, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Levin, and my thanks to Chairman Camp and Chairman Davis. You know, the joy that my wife Libby and I feel each time we're home in Texas with our 3 young granddaughters makes it incomprehensible to us, as I think it does to most Americans, how anyone could abuse their child. But our daughter, who is a physician and heads a clinic for the uninsured, and her husband, a pediatrician there in Austin, have seen personally and told us about some of the tragic instances of abuse and neglect of our youngest Texans. Indeed, over 700,000 children across America each year are confronted with this ugly reality. One of the experts who testified before our subcommittee suggested that 1 child every 6 hours is reported to be killed by abuse and neglect in the United States. Each of these numbers, of course, represents a very precious little human being. The bipartisan bill that we have worked on in our committee extends and improves some of the policies that will help increase the ability of the states to respond to our at-risk children and respond to child abuse. But as we work together on this legislation, I think it's also important to recognize what we have not accomplished. Of the children that are found to be victims of abuse and neglect in America today, 40% never receive any kind of follow-up service or intervention. We have a foster care system that provides federal assistance, but it provides that assistance to less than half of the children in America who are in need of care due to the eligibility system that is woefully out of date. These challenges require much bigger responses in the future, and some of these responses come from assuring that the Social Services Block Grant remains strong, and it's troubling that they're impacted in a negative way by the discontinuation of the TANF supplemental grants. In fact, children are now more likely to be poor than in any other age group, and as our state and local governments cut their budgets, some of those who are most vulnerable get left out. The bill before us reauthorizes the Child Welfare Services and Promoting Safe and Stable Families programs for the next 5 years. It provides $700 million per year to fund child protective services. In my home state of Texas, this helps protect children in San Antonio through family-based safety services that strengthen and restore families, and in Travis County through programs that promote children affected by substance abuse. The Court Improvement Program works with the highest court in each state, and the regional partnership grants that are authorized are helpful in a variety of ways at the local level. I just received a contact this morning from my friend, District Judge Darlene Byrne in Austin, who is one of the founders of the drug court there. And she says that the resources provided to families through the regional partnership grants that are authorized in this act have transformed the lives and helped stop the cycle of drug abuse and violence that would not have been possible without this regional partnership grant program. The legislation also answers better supervision of, I hope it assures, but it answers the need to provide better supervision of children who are prescribed psychotropic medications to address their health care needs. This additional supervision will help ensure that these medications are only prescribed when they are necessary. The legislation improves the sharing of data. As the chairman mentioned, this is very important. It's been a particular interest of Chairman Davis. Just as data sharing can detect individuals who should not receive benefits, it also can be used to improve outreach to Americans who are eligible for assistance but are not receiving it. Mr. Chairman, the future of our most vulnerable children depends upon our ability to work together to address the big challenges that remain in the child welfare system. And I look forward to continuing that effort with you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. The committee will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 2883. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, which was distributed in advance along with a green sheet explaining it. Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read, open for amendment at any point, and considered base text for purpose of amendment. I'll now turn to Matt Whitinger, Staff Director for the Subcommittee on Human Resources, to provide the technical description of the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and would ask that members hold their questions until after his presentation. Thank you, Mr. Whitinger. In addition to staff, Mr. Doug Steiger with the Department of Health and Human Services is also here to answer any questions members may have. Mr. Whitinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the green sheet shows, the changes to H.R. 2883 reflected in the Chairman's amendment in nature of a substitute are technical in nature only. I won't go into those. Title I reauthorizes for 5 years 2 child welfare programs under the committee's jurisdiction, in each case maintaining current funding levels. Section 101 reauthorizes the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Child Welfare Services Program and makes modest adjustments to its state plan requirements. For example, Mr. Chairman, as you described, building on a GAO report you requested and a July subcommittee hearing, states must describe data sources they use to report child deaths due to maltreatment and how they will include more complete information in the future. Section 102 reauthorizes a second program, the Promoting Safe and Stable Families Program, also for 5 years while making several technical adjustments. Section 103 extends the authorization of several set-asides under the Promoting Safe and Stable Families Program. For example, funding monthly caseworker visits and regional partnership grants, such as those that Mr. Doggett described in his statement, to combat parental substance abuse. Section 104 extends for 5 years the Court Improvement Program while maintaining funding at the current $30 million annual level. Program administration is eased by allowing states to submit 1 instead of as many as 3 applications for federal funds, and a new $1 million set-aside from the $30 million total is provided for Indian tribes. Section 105 directs the Secretary of HHS to develop standard data elements for child welfare services programs. This is part of a larger effort designed to ease program administration, improve program accountability, and ultimately improve the services provided to program participants, as Chairman Davis and Ranking Member Doggett described in their statements. Section 106 makes several modest adjustments to foster care and adoption assistance programs, for example, specifying that promoting educational stability is a goal for each foster care placement and requiring states to provide older foster youth a free copy of their credit report and additional assistance in resolving any inaccuracies in that credit report, especially if caused by identity theft. Section 107 provides an effective date for Title I, which is October 1st, 2011, or later if states need to pass legislation to implement the changes. Title II of the legislation renews child welfare waiver authority for fiscal years 2012 through 2014. During each of those years, HHS could approve up to 10 new waiver applications for programs lasting generally up to 5 years, but all demonstration projects must be completed by the end of fiscal year 2019. Among other new conditions that are applied to states receiving waivers, states must demonstrate that they have or plan to implement at least 2 of what the legislation calls child welfare improvement policies that are specified in the bill. Those policies range from establishing a foster care bill of rights to operating kinship guardianship programs to increasing the number of sibling placements, among several other options that states would have. Title III of the bill provides a statement about the budgetary effects of the legislation. And Mr. Chairman, that completes my walkthrough of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Whitinger. As I said, either Mr. Whitinger or Mr. Steiger are available for questions. Are there any questions? There being none, are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no amendments, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. I will now recognize Mr. Herger for the purpose of offering a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee favorably report H.R. 2883 as amended to the House of Representatives.
The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, members will have an additional 2 days to file with the committee clerk supplemental, additional, or minority views. So ordered. There being no further business before the committee stands adjourned.